Welcome to Obsession Engineering. Normally we're all about sports bikes and speed, but today we're going to relax a little bit with a Triumph Speed Twin. But it's not just going to be a boring road test. We are going to do a road test and then we're going to take some of it apart and improve it.
I've had the Speed Twin since last June. Love the little bike. Power delivery is fantastic. Fantastic little package. Unfortunately, the suspension lets it down a little. Once you get spirited riding, it gets a little bit upset and out of square.
So what's the plan? Well, firstly I'm going to take it for a bit of a test ride and get a second opinion of it. See how good or how bad it really is. And then we're going to replace the rear shocks and the fork internals with some Bitubo loveliness.
First impressions of the Speed Twin are pretty good. It's nice and user friendly, the controls do everything you would expect, and through town it's nice and easy to ride. Once you start getting out onto the open road and trying to go a little bit quicker though, there are a few little problems. The steering feels relatively heavy at low speed, but I think this is mostly because the bike's relatively heavy. When you hit the front brakes, the fork travel just basically disappears. There doesn't seem like there's any real control to how fast they dive, and the springs feel very, very soft. So, before you know it, you're towards the bottom end of the stroke and you can't really push the brake any harder. Not the end of the world, but not exactly confidence inspiring. The rear is also quite soft. So once you get into a corner, especially if there's any bumps, the rear sort of sits down, and it also seems like it's got too much rebound damping in it. And therefore it just sort of sits at the bottom of the stroke and it becomes quite wallowy. Now over the bumps it's relatively compliant as long as you're upright, but if you throw in cornering and bumps, or just fast cornering, the bike just sort of wallows around at the bottom of its stroke and doesn't really give you much confidence to go any faster. It never really gets out of shape, it just sort of moves around on the road and doesn't really have any accuracy. And I think we can make it better. At the back end, we're going to fit some Bitubo shocks. So, we'll open the box, and these are the Bitubo shocks we're going to fit. They are adjustable for preload and damping. They are available in chrome or black, and they are available in standard length or in shorter length if you are short of the leg or want your bike a little bit lower to the floor. So, fitting those is going to be relatively straightforward. The bike is on stands. We have a sort of an arrangement underneath the frame rails with some wood so it doesn't mark anything, and the paddock stand at the back is loose, so there is no load on the back wheel, so it's a case of taking the bolts out, taking the shock off, putting the new one on, and then doing the same on the other side. So fitting the shocks is almost as easy as we anticipated, and we didn't even have to break out the big hammers. So fitting the shocks is pretty straightforward. The easiest way we found to do it was to undo the top bolts, then pull both of the shocks off the top, drop the back wheel down a little bit because then the bottom bolts miss the silencer, then you can change the bottom bolts, push it back up and slide the tops back in. Fairly straightforward. We now have damping adjustment up here and preload adjustment down here, so we are tailoring to suit much better. With the shock absorbers fitted, it's time to move on to the front of the bike. So what we have to do here, because we're changing the fork internals, we have to take the forks out of the bike. Now, the fork internals can only be fitted at a registered Bitubo service centre. Luckily, I am a registered Bitubo service centre, so that's all happy days. So what do we have to do here? We need to take the brake calipers off, take the front wheel out, and then pretty much just slide each fork leg out of the bike. With the brakes removed and the front wheel slid out, we just have to take the front mudguard off, measure how high the forks actually sit in the bike, and then undo the yoke clamps and slip everything apart. You see, I could nearly get that fork to bottom out just by bouncing on it with my body weight, and there is no damping in it, because this one only has a spring in it. The other leg I can still nearly bottom that leg out, but it has far too much damping in it, it's far too slow to recover. So that sort of goes with what I found when I rode the bike of. Like, you hit the brakes or you hit a bump, the wheel moves a lot, but then it doesn't really recover. it's too slow. So you end up with this thing where the bike just sort of pitches and wallows and it's not very pleasant to ride. So we're going to remove all these standard internals and we're going to fit something considerably better. So what we have in the big Bitubo box is, once we've put the foam aside, these lovely cartridges. So these have the springs on already, and in the top we have adjustments for preload, and this was the compression damping adjuster, and the other leg has the rebound adjustment in it. What we also have in the kit is these shims, so that if you wanted the springs, the forks to actually be shorter than standard, so the bike was lower, to maybe suit a lower setup with lower shocks, we have shims that can be fitted to swap around with some bits, and we have a tool for adjusting the preload. So there they are, they're warranted, they're good quality, and before long they'll be fitted to our forks. Before we fit the new internals, of course, we need to remove the old internals out of the fork. So we're starting with the right hand leg, and right hand is rebound leg, right for rebound. So what we need to do is undo the bolt in the bottom of the leg, down here, using that, which I will do considerably easier with my other hand, and then that will basically release the cartridge, and then we just need to take the fork top off and everything will fall out and all the oil will go down the sink, or at least that's the idea. So that's the cartridge out of the fork leg. There has not been murder, it's just very red fork oil. So this is the cartridge. In there, in effect, this bit attaches your fork top, that moves up and down with one bit of the fork, this bit's attached to the bottom of the fork, and a piston moves up and down in there with shims and bits on it to give you some damping. As it turns out, too much rebound damping, probably not enough compression. But such is life. This is not really rebuildable because instead of screwing them together, they just pin them together because they never expected money to actually do anything with it. So there you go. A surprisingly cheap item in a quite nice expensive bike, of which the rest of it is lovely quality. So that is my right hand fork leg built. I haven't shown you too much detail because this has to be done at an authorised service centre. But this is it. The cartridge is fitted. This is the rebound leg in the right. And we'll have a little demonstration now of exactly how much difference it makes. So the old leg, I could nearly bottom it out by hand, and it came back really, really slowly. This is on the recommended Bitubo sort of preload and rebound setting, and let's see what it looks like. And you can see there, the rate it comes back is much quicker, much more like I'd expect from a normal fork. So I think that will make the bike instantly better. So the next thing to do is strip the left-hand leg, put the compression leg in. So it's quite common for bike manufacturers to save a few quid on suspension because the bits inside nobody really sees until today. So inside the left-hand fork leg, underneath the fork cap, is literally a spacer, a spring, and this tube, which is just the outside from the cartridge on the other side, and that's not got any damping in it. It has literally just got a bolt going in the bottom and a top-out spring to hold everything together. The convenience for me is, of course, I can sell you some Bitubo, so you can improve your damping, but if Triumph had just spent a few more quid on each bike, they wouldn't have needed this improvement. So here we go, here's the compression leg. Putting the cartridge in is fairly straightforward, but of course your authorised service centre will be doing it for you. So, let's see what difference that makes. So, will I be able to nearly bottom the fork out with just my body weight? Definitely not. That's a distinct improvement on before. So now I have both forks rebuilt, it's time to slip everything back into the bike, making sure that we get the height of the fork in the yoke the same as it was before. And then we can see if it feels a bit better. Refitting the forks is pretty much the reverse of the removal procedure. You just have to make sure you get everything at the right height and then torque it up to manufacturer's spec. So we're nearly there at the point the bike can be ridden. But before then, we are going to do some sag measurements just to make sure the bike is sitting at the right point. So what we need is some fully extended measurements first. So we've left the bike on the bench with all the stands under it, so both wheels are sort of free to move to full extension. I have tools for doing measuring, so I'm going to take some full length measurements. So for the rear wheel measurement, I'm going from just behind the wheel spindle to a point on the luggage rack up here. And conveniently, that's dead on 500mm, and that is actually a fluke because I hadn't planned that. 500mm fully extended. At the front, I'm going to go from where the fork gaiter actually meets the fork leg, because that point doesn't move, and I'm going to go up to the bottom of the bottom yoke. And that is 203mm. Right, we previously had 501mm. We now have 489, so we've got 12mm of sag in the rear, which is well in the range that Bitubo suggests, so that's a good start. Right, at the front we had 203mm, and we now have 174mm, so we're at 29mm, which is bang in the middle of the range suggested. Right, with Pete sat on the bike, Bitubo say 25 to 30mm, and we are at 30mm, so we're happy with that. So we'll have a look and we'll see what the front's like. Right, in the front we're looking for 35 to 40mm. And we are bang on 40mm, so we're happy with that, which means the next thing to do is go and ride it. Back on the open road on the Speed Twin, and the difference is notable pretty much straight away. On the brakes the bike is so much more composed, so you feel you can push the brake harder if you wanted to. Once you get into the corners the bike tracks a line and it's a lot more accurate. It sort of goes exactly where you want it now. The bump recovery is so much better that if you do hit bumps towards a corner, it doesn't really matter. The bike will still recover and go round the corner how you wanted it to. Because of this, you can ride the bike harder and you've just got more confidence in it. The bike, should we say, it feels, well, it just sort of feels better. It feels a lot more alive, and this is really the bike that Triumph should have made to begin with.
So now we've actually had some dry roads and I've had a chance to go and ride the bike with its Bitubo upgraded suspension in it. What do I think? Bearing in mind I may be a little bit biased. Well, it's a lot better. Over the bumps and stuff it's a lot more composed. When you hit the brakes it doesn't just collapse to nothing. The biggest difference is if you hit bumps on the way into corners or you're trying to go a little bit quicker, the bike just stays composed and it does what you'd expect a bike to do normally. In effect, what I think we've actually achieved is to make a bike that rides how they should have made it out of the factory. There are no real downsides. It still goes over bumps perfectly pleasantly, there's just more feedback to it and it just rides nicer. But being as I am biased, we ought to really get the opinion of the man who's actually paid for these things.
Well, first few miles with the new Bitubo upgrade, superb. It handles like it should handle. It works like it should work. It is composed and taut.
With your purchase.
Very happy indeed, thank you.
Thanks to Pete for letting us tinker with his motorbike, and thank you for watching. Please join me again soon for some more motorbike fun.